I've been watching the way society has changed over the past few years, especially around issues of identity, and there's something that keeps nagging at me. Every June, I see rainbow flags everywhere, on government buildings, in schools, across corporate logos. And I understand the intention. It's meant to show solidarity with the LGBTQ+ community, to celebrate diversity, to remind people they have the right to be proud of who they are. And I have no problem with that. I support the idea that everyone deserves to live openly and without fear. But here's where I start to feel uncomfortable when I ask, where's the straight flag? People look at me like I've just said something hateful. The question isn't meant to provoke anger or diminish anyone's identity. What I'm trying to ask you, if we live in a society that celebrates all identities, then why is mine excluded? Why is it acceptable, even encouraged, to fly pride flags everywhere, but if someone were to fly a flag representing straight identity, it would be seen as offensive, even dangerous? That feels like a double standard to me. I'm not asking for a parade. I'm not looking for special recognition. I just find it troubling that in our pursuit of inclusion, we've started to pick and choose who gets to feel seen and heard. It's as though being straight, or being part of the so-called majority, means you have to be quiet, even invisible. And that doesn't feel like equality. That feels like silence being imposed under the mask of progress. There's something tiring about how everything now revolves around identity labels. I support people's right to define themselves however they choose, but I also wonder when it became necessary to wear identity like a badge in every setting. Workplaces, schools, media, even personal conversations. I sometimes feel that if I don't participate in the same language or wave the same flag, I'll be labeled ignorant or worse. But all I'm really doing is trying to express how I feel without stepping on anyone else's rights. Isn't that what freedom of expression is supposed to be? What frustrates me the most is that any time I raise these points, people assume I'm being intolerant. That couldn't be further from the truth. I don't want to take away anyone's flag. I just want to understand why having pride in who I am, without attaching it to activism or ideology, is treated like a problem. I don't feel threatened by pride flags. I feel confused by the fact that the same celebration isn't extended universally. I'm told that because I haven't been oppressed. I don't need a flag or a voice. But I believe we're all human, and we all deserve the same respect and visibility. Excluding someone based on historical privilege doesn't solve inequality. It just shifts the imbalance in a new direction. That's not inclusion. That's selective recognition. I want to live in a world where no one is afraid to be who they are, and that includes me. I want to feel like my voice matters, even if I'm not part of a protected class or a trending social cause. When I ask, where's my straight flag? What I'm really asking is, can I be proud too, without being shamed for it? If the answer is no, then maybe we need to have a deeper conversation about what equality really means. I've often found myself wondering how far we've really come when it comes to equality, not in terms of policy or rights, but in the way we treat each other in everyday society. It's strange to me that we've reached a point where celebrating certain identities is not only accepted, but expected, while others, specifically the majority, are almost shamed into silence. I'm told to respect everyone's identity, to acknowledge their flags, their days of pride, their sense of self, and I genuinely try too. But when I flip the question and ask, what about a straight pride flag? Or can I celebrate being in the same way others celebrate being LGBTQ+? I'm either laughed at, ridiculed, or accused of being provocative. That doesn't feel like equality to me. It feels like a double standard. We're constantly told that pride is about inclusion, about dignity, about celebrating who you are without shame. I support that in principle. I don't believe anyone should be persecuted or made to feel less than for how they identify or whom they love. But I do question why that same openness doesn't apply when someone like me wants to express my own identity, which happens to be heterosexual. It's as if pride has become a club with an unspoken rule. Some are welcome to express their identity openly, and others are expected to sit quietly in the back. I've seen government buildings lit up in rainbow colors, corporate logos transformed for Pride Month, and endless messaging about how vital it is to show support for LGBTQ communities. And I agree, support and acceptance are critical, but where's the support for straight people? Where's the flag, the month, the affirmation that our identity matters too? When I ask that, people say things like, you don't need it, you're not oppressed. That response carries its own bias. The point of pride, at least as it was originally intended, wasn't just about oppression. It was about dignity, presence, and being allowed to exist unapologetically. Why does that right suddenly not apply to everyone? I don't want to take anything away from anyone. That's not the purpose of my questioning. I simply want to understand why society seems to operate on two separate rule sets, one for minority groups and another for those perceived as part of the dominant culture. But if true equality is what we're striving for, then fairness shouldn't be conditional. It shouldn't be that one group is allowed to express pride and another is expected to stay quiet just because history has treated them differently. History is important. I don't deny the struggles that LGBTQ individuals have faced and continue to face in many parts of the world. But should that history justify a new kind of discrimination where certain people are made to feel their identity is irrelevant or offensive? That's what bothers me. When straight people speak up, they're often accused of fragility or labeled as trying to co-opt something sacred. But isn't the very essence of inclusion supposed to be about mutual respect, not selective validation? This isn't just about flags or parades, it's about principle. It's about whether we genuinely believe in the idea that everyone matters, or whether we're just paying lip service to a politically convenient definition of equality. It's become taboo to even suggest that straight people might deserve the same space to be visible. I've seen how quickly people shut down the conversation, how fast the accusations come. But what I see in that reaction is fear, not fear of the question, but fear of confronting the contradiction in their own values. When we create spaces that welcome only certain identities under the guise of progress, we're not creating a better society. We're just shifting the imbalance. That's not justice. That's just a new hierarchy built on old resentments. And the irony is that many of the people promoting this selective inclusion don't even see the inconsistency in what they're doing. They'll tell me to be proud of who I am. Until I actually try to be, it feels like we're in a moment where questioning the new orthodoxy is more dangerous than challenging the old one. But I won't be silent just because it's easier. I believe in asking uncomfortable questions if they expose deeper truths. And the truth I see is that we've replaced one set of double standards with another, and we're calling it progress. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal treatment. If pride really means pride for everyone, then it should include me too. There's a strange paradox we live in today. On one hand, we're told that freedom of expression is a core value, something to be cherished and protected. On the other hand, the moment someone says something that challenges current social narratives or touches on sensitive topics, they're met with outrage, cancellation, or public shaming. It's as if freedom of expression is welcomed only when it aligns with popular opinion or progressive ideals. That contradiction is becoming increasingly hard to ignore. I've seen this play out repeatedly, not just in media, but in everyday conversation. You raise a question that doesn't fit the current cultural script, like asking whether pride events should make space for everyone, or whether gender identity and biological sex are being confused, and suddenly you're labeled as hateful, ignorant, or dangerous. The irony is that many of those attacking you claim to be champions of free speech. But real freedom means allowing people to express uncomfortable or unpopular views, not just the ones everyone claps for. There's no denying that certain expressions carry pain for some communities, and that words can hurt. But if society begins to silence individuals based on subjective emotional responses, then where do we draw the line? When expression becomes a matter of social approval rather than principle, it stops being free and starts becoming regulated speech. That might not happen through official government censorship, but the pressure from institutions, corporations, and online mobs can be just as effective in shutting people down. The deeper issue is that social taboos have shifted. In the past, religious and conservative norms dictated what or couldn't be said. Now, those restrictions often come from the opposite direction, from progressive activism and identity politics. Certain words, ideas, or even jokes are now considered off limits, not by law, but by culture. And that kind of restriction breeds fear. People self-censor not because they don't believe in what they're saying, but because they're afraid of losing jobs, friends, or reputations. That's not a healthy society. That's intellectual suffocation. What frustrates me the most is the hypocrisy. The same people who demand tolerance often show very little of it when someone expresses a view they find offensive. They'll say, "You're free to speak, but you're not free from consequences." That's true in theory, but in practice, those consequences are often disproportionate, cruel, and aimed at silencing rather than debating. If someone says something genuinely hateful, let their ideas be exposed and defeated in open discussion, not buried under a pile of online vitriol and mass reporting. Freedom of expression also means allowing people to explore, question, and even get things wrong without being destroyed for it. That's how ideas evolve and societies grow. When expression is policed by fear, innovation and authenticity die. People start parroting safe, acceptable narratives instead of speaking from experience or curiosity. That leads to stagnation, not just in politics, but in art, media, and even science. It's especially dangerous when institutions start participating in this censorship by taboo. Universities that once prided themselves on being marketplaces of ideas are now places where certain topics are unteachable. Media outlets avoid controversial truths to avoid backlash. And even comedians, those who used to push boundaries, are walking on eggshells. We've built a culture that punishes risk and rewards conformity. That's not freedom. That's ideological obedience. And yet, freedom of expression is not just about defending the agreeable. Its real test is whether we can defend the right to express what we personally disagree with. If I believe in liberty, I have to believe in it even when the message offends me. Otherwise, it's not liberty. It's privilege disguised as principle. The easy path is to join the outrage. The hard path is to listen, challenge, and still allow the other person their voice. Social taboos have a place. They can help protect the vulnerable and create moral boundaries, but they should never replace honest conversation or act as barriers to truth. When fear replaces dialogue, society becomes a performance. Everyone saying the right things but hiding what they truly think. That's not progress. That's repression with a smile. True freedom of expression demands that we stop policing thought with outrage, that we stop turning disagreement into character assassination, and that we start making space again for real conversation, even when it's uncomfortable. Because if we only allow expression when it's approved, then what we're really supporting isn't freedom. It's silence dressed as virtue. Lately, I've been feeling something that's hard to articulate without immediately being misunderstood. Something I know many others are quietly feeling too, identity fatigue. It's not that I don't care about people's struggles or identities, or that I don't recognize the importance of acknowledging diversity. I do, but the way society has been pushing this constant, overwhelming focus on identity, gender, race, sexuality, pronouns, heritage, labels, has begun to feel less like inclusion and more like an exhausting performance, one that demands constant participation and absolute agreement. It's as though we've swung the cultural pendulum so far in one direction that the balance is lost. That's what I mean by cultural overcorrection. In our attempt to fix real injustices, racism, homophobia, sexism, we've created a new kind of rigidity where the smallest misstep in language or thought is treated as a moral failing. It's as though every conversation must now begin with a declaration of where we stand on every social issue, who we support, how woke we are, and how deeply we're aware of our own privilege. It doesn't feel like progress anymore. It feels like pressure. And it's relentless. Social media plays a huge role in this overcorrection. Every brand, every public figure, every institution seems to compete in a never-ending virtue signaling contest. Pride flags, Black Lives Matter hashtags, land acknowledgements, diversity statements, while well-intentioned, have become so routine, so corporate, they've started to feel hollow. The sincerity is gone. What's left is obligation and, for many, silent resentment. Not because people are bigoted or regressive, but because they're tired of being constantly told who they are, what they should feel guilty about, and how they must express that guilt publicly. It's no longer about personal character or shared values. Now it's about group identity boxes we're all supposed to check. And if you don't have an oppressed identity, you're often told to take a back seat, to be quiet, to defer. There's a subtle message that your voice doesn't count as much you're straight, white male, or come from a so-called privileged background. That doesn't feel like equality. That feels like a new form of judgment. The fatigue comes not just from the volume of identity-based rhetoric, but from the impossibility of ever saying the right thing. The rules change constantly. Terms evolve, meanings shift, new pronouns emerge, and yesterday's progressive language is today's microaggression. People aren't given the grace to catch up or learn at their own pace. Instead, they're cancelled, shamed, or labeled as problematic. That culture of public punishment doesn't build bridges. It creates fear, and fear leads to silence. People retreat from honest conversation. They stop engaging, not because they don't care, but because they're tired. tired of walking on eggshells, tired of being accused of things they never intended, tired of being told they're not doing the work, when they're simply trying to live without conflict. It's not apathy, it's self-preservation. This cultural overcorrection has also created a kind of identity inflation. Now, every minor difference, every nuanced feeling becomes a full-fledged identity category. The alphabet keeps growing LGBTQIS and beyond. New flags are introduced, new awareness months, new sensitivities. The more we try to label everyone, the more fragmented we become. Instead of bringing people together, we're dividing them into endlessly smaller subgroups, each with its own set of norms and grievances. The unity that inclusion was supposed to foster is now crumbling under the weight of its own complexity. It's important to acknowledge that the original goals were noble. Marginalized groups demanded visibility, respect, and fairness, things they absolutely deserve. But good intentions don't shield movements from criticism when they start to lose perspective. What began as a fight for dignity has turned, in some cases, into a culture of domination, of moral superiority and constant correction. It's not about being heard anymore. It's about controlling the narrative. What's being lost in all this is the common humanity, the idea that we're more than the sum of our identities, that we can connect across differences without constantly highlighting them, that we can share jokes, stories, struggles, without every interaction being filtered through an ideological lens. People are hungry for authenticity again. They want to be able to speak freely, ask questions, even make mistakes, without fear of social annihilation. I don't believe the answer is to swing the pendulum back to ignorance or exclusion, but we do need to find a middle ground, a space where we can respect identity without being consumed by it, where we can be thoughtful without being terrified, where cultural awareness doesn't turn into cultural overreach. Because if we continue down this path, the result won't be a more just society. It will be a more fragile, divided, and exhausted one. Every year, especially during Pride Month, I notice a wave of institutional displays, rainbow flags on government buildings, pride logos on corporate banners, flags of specific gender identities flying outside universities and schools. At first glance, it looks like progress, a public sign of inclusion and solidarity. But the more I watch this unfold, the more I begin to question the motivations behind it. There's something deeper happening with these displays. Flags, once symbols of identity or resistance, are now powerful tools in the hands of institutions, used to signal values, control narratives, and at times divide rather than unite. Flags are inherently political. They are visual, sure than for belonging, belief, and alignment. So when a government office raises a pride flag, it isn't just about celebrating inclusion. It's making a political statement. The problem is not everyone agrees on what that statement means or what cause is being endorsed. The moment institutions start choosing which flags to fly, they also choose which identities, ideologies, and voices to amplify, and which ones to ignore. And that's where the controversy begins. I've seen firsthand how these decisions create tension. If a city hall raises a flag to honor LGBTQ+ identities, but refuses to raise a flag for veterans, religious groups, or other communities, what message does that send? It suggests a hierarchy of causes, a selective form of representation. The symbolism becomes performative when it lacks consistency or fairness. Institutions claim neutrality, but their flag choices say otherwise. They're not just flying colors, they're choosing sides. There's also the question of sincerity. When massive corporations suddenly turn their logos rainbow-colored in June, only to revert to business as usual by July, it feels less like genuine support and more like calculated branding. These are the same companies that, in many cases, do business with countries where LGBTQ+ rights are non-existent or openly violated. Yet, back home, they wrap themselves in progressive imagery to maintain public favor. It's hard not to see that as opportunism. These flag displays are often more about corporate optics than community advocacy. Schools and universities, once seen as places of intellectual freedom, are now becoming battlegrounds for flag politics. I've walked into classrooms where pride flags are displayed prominently, while national flags are absent or even frowned upon. The intention may be to create safe, inclusive spaces. But when only some identities are visually honored, others start to feel erased or unwelcome. Parents raise concerns, students hesitate to speak honestly, and staff tread carefully, and not because they oppose diversity, but because they don't want to violate unwritten rules about what's acceptable. I understand that some flags represent groups that have long been marginalized, but representation shouldn't come at the cost of fairness. If institutions are going to be in the business of flying flags, They need a clear and consistent standard, not one that favors whichever social movement is currently dominant or politically fashionable. Because once flags become tools of ideological signaling, they risk dividing the very communities they're meant to support. The irony is that many of these institutions claim to be promoting unity. But unity doesn't come from selective symbolism. It comes from treating all individuals with equal respect, regardless of whether they belong to a trending identity category. When one group's flag is flown high and another's request is denied, it sends a message not of tolerance but of favoritism. And over time, that breeds resentment. What makes it even more complicated is that people who question these displays are often labeled as intolerant or bigoted. But asking why one flag is raised while another is not isn't an act of hatred. It's a question of fairness. It's about holding institutions accountable for the messages they send and ensuring that public spaces remain truly public, not captured by any one ideology. There's a need for balance here. Representation matters, and symbols can bring comfort to those who've felt invisible. But when institutions use flags as tools of conformity rather than as symbols of shared values, they do more harm than good. And public spaces should reflect the diversity of all people, not just those who fit within current cultural trends. Flags can be powerful symbols of freedom, identity, and justice. But in the hands of institutions, they can also become instruments of pressure, division, and control. That's why I believe it's time to step back and ask, are these flag displays really about inclusion? Or are they about signaling loyalty to a particular worldview? Until institutions can answer that honestly, we'll continue to see more conflict, not less.